To make an end is to make a beginning. Thomas Stearns Eliot, Little Gidding. In the last episode, we covered 2 of the 3 types of collaboration between contexts. In this one, we will cover the last type, separate ways, and then continue with context maps and C4 diagrams. We will then conclude this shorter video with my personal opinion and experiences and the conclusion. With this short summary out of the way, let us pick up where we left and introduce the final type of collaboration. The final type of collaboration is no cooperation at all. This usually happens due to the following: communication issues. Sometimes, due to the political nature of the company, teams have a hard time collaborating. In this case, it can be more cost-effective to duplicate functionality instead of cooperating. Simple generic subdomains. When it comes to generic subdomains, if they are simple enough and cheap enough to integrate, it may be more cost-effective to integrate them in multiple places. An example of this can be a logging or authentication framework. Model differences. In the final case, the models of both supplier and client are so different that developing an ACL or an OHS layer is still too expensive to make sense. In this case, once again, duplication is cheaper than cooperation. Due to the difficulty to collaborate, this pattern usually means the bounded contexts in cores will be smaller and easier to maintain, since no effort will be allocated to integrate with one another. This also means the boundaries are clear and that deployments and development are independent. However, should the need for collaboration arise at some point, the cost for integration will be considerably higher since no effort was allocated to it, and there will be an overhead in coordination efforts. With the main types of collaboration explained, we can now create a diagram of all the bounded contexts we use and the collaboration patterns in place. Such a diagram is called a context map, and it offers strategic insight in many levels. High-level design. By having every bounded context in one place and detailing the relations between them, you get an overall idea of the design of the entire solution. Power dynamics. By having the communication patterns explicitly documented in the diagram, you get a better understanding of the politics and power dynamics within your company and with third parties. For these reasons, it is important to have a context map from the beginning and to keep it updated as the project evolves. Here Vlad defends this should be a shared effort between all teams, a project essentially owned by everyone. In order to have proper documentation, you can use tools like Context Mapper or use simple diagram tools like Mermaid Graphics. Another way to describe the architecture of your solution is to use C4 diagrams. Much like context maps, C4 diagrams can provide a high-level view of the system. However, where context maps also map the power dynamics between different contexts, C4 diagrams prefer to go into deeper levels of abstraction instead, eventually reaching the point where you have your components and code mapped out. Unlike context maps, C4 diagrams also understand that a project has a life cycle where it gets more mature over time, and therefore, as time goes by, it gives you tools to map the architecture depending on the maturity of the project. The more mature and stable the project, the more details you can map out. It is important to understand that context maps and C4 diagrams can both be used in conjunction in a project, as they effectively have different purposes. While they do share the commonality of showing a high-level view of the design, context maps are more focused on relations, while C4 diagrams are more focused on architecture and system internal structure. And we can finally conclude this chapter, which we can summarize with: there are 3 main types of relations: cooperation, customer-supplier, and separate ways. Cooperation has two patterns: partnership and shared kernel. Customer-supplier has three patterns: conformist, anti-corruption layer, and open host service. Separate ways has no patterns and happens mostly due to the fact that duplication is cheaper than collaboration. Context maps are a valuable tool to understand high-level design and power dynamics within the company. C4 diagrams can be used in conjunction with context maps to map the internal structure of your system. And with this fresh summary in hand, it is time to, once again, bother you with my personal experiences and opinions. I personally found this chapter to be quite valuable. Power dynamics are something we engineers usually have to deal with, but that very few understand. I have been programming for half my life, and with over a decade of experience in the workforce, I can personally attest that understanding power dynamics goes a long way in achieving seniority. However, even though I value this information, I still have my doubts, namely when it comes to context maps. In all the companies I have ever worked, none of them, even the ones applying domain-driven design, ever had a context map. I believe this is due to the fact that it has to be managed by everyone. By now you probably guess what I am about to say. This is a major red flag. Initiatives owned by everyone are effectively maintained by no one. Furthermore, because any problem hard enough to solve will consist of several bounded contexts and subdomains, with different levels of nesting between them, maintaining an updated context map is not a trivial task. And this is, if we only consider the technical hardships of understanding the problem at hand. Throw in a company restructuring, buyout, or the ephemeral nature of teams, and you basically have an ever-changing diagram, basically impossible to complete with any level of decent accuracy. All this tells me that context maps are suited for more stable companies or projects that are smaller in scope, where there is a small team capable of understanding the full scope of the project. Another thing the author did not mention were the C4 diagrams. Admittedly, they suffer from the same problems context maps do, but I still hold the principle that these tools can hold value, and I believe Kononov could have introduced this in this chapter, much like Karthik and Pramanand did in their book, Domain-Driven Design with Java. Should you decide to check the sources, you will find many commonalities between the work of these authors, but also some discrepancies, like the meaning of a published language as I mentioned before. When finding this, I picked the viewpoint I found to be more convincing and gravitated the script towards that, making a conscious choice to not present information I didn't feel mattered or that lacked coherence. But I still encourage you to check the sources and make up your own mind. And this is pretty much it for Chapter 4. Thus far, we have been discussing strategic design, the first 4 chapters of the book. But now an era comes to an end, and a new one dawns on the horizon, Part 2, Tactical Design. Chapter 5 will be the introduction to the second part of the book by Vlad Kononov, where we will discuss how to implement simple business logic. If you would like to see more content like this, then feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Wish you all the best, and I hope to see you again for Chapter 5.